The blizzard hit Camp Verde so hard that Clara Norwood couldn't see her own hands stretched out in front of her face, and somewhere between the howling wind and her numb, stumbling feet, she realized she was going to die out here alone. She had been foolish, so terribly foolish. The October morning had dawned crisp and clear when she'd left the settlement to gather herbs in the foothills. The Arizona sun warm enough to make the journey seem safe. But the mountains were unpredictable in 1884, and what locals called a freak snowstorm had descended from nowhere, transforming the landscape into a white nightmare. Clara was only 22 years old, barely 2 months in this harsh territory after leaving St. Louis, and already she'd made a fatal mistake. Her fingers had lost feeling an hour ago. Her dress was soaked through, the heavy fabric clinging to her legs and making each step a battle. The basket of herbs she'd collected lay abandoned somewhere behind her, lost to the snow. She couldn't remember which direction led back to town. Every rock formation looked the same beneath its white coating. Every ravine could be salvation or doom. Clara's teeth chattered so violently she bit her tongue, tasting copper. Her father had died of pneumonia back in Missouri. Her mother had followed 6 months later, heartbroken and hollow. Clara had no siblings, no family, just a small inheritance that had bought her passage west and a modest room above the general store where she worked keeping books and selling dry goods. The wind screamed like something alive and vicious. Clara fell to her knees in a snowdrift, her skirts dragging her down. "Get up," she commanded herself. "Get up or you'll freeze right here," but her body wouldn't obey. The cold had seeped so deep into her bones that the idea of moving seemed impossible, absurd even. She thought about praying but couldn't form the words. Her vision blurred, then she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the storm. A horse's whinny, sharp and close. Clara tried to call out, but her voice emerged as barely a whisper. She tried again, forcing air through her frozen throat. "Help!" The horse appeared like a phantom through the white curtain, a massive chestnut gelding with ice crystals forming on its mane. And on its back sat a man bundled in a heavy coat, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, a bandana covering the lower half of his face. He swung down from the saddle with practiced ease and was beside her in seconds. "Jesus Christ, what are you doing out here?" His voice was deep, rough with alarm. He pulled the bandana down, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, maybe 30 years old, with sharp cheekbones and intense gray eyes that assessed her with quick efficiency. "Can you stand?" "I don't think so," Clara managed through chattering teeth. He didn't waste time arguing. Strong arms scooped her up as though she weighed nothing, and suddenly she was pressed against a chest solid as oak, lifted onto the horse's saddle. He mounted behind her, wrapping his coat around them both, cocooning her in warmth that felt like salvation. One arm banded around her waist, holding her secure, while his other hand gripped the reins. "My cabin's not far. Hold on." He kicked the horse into motion, and Clara had no choice but to lean back against him, her frozen body seeking any heat it could find. She could feel his heartbeat steady and strong against her spine, could feel the controlled power in the way he guided the horse through conditions that would have panicked a lesser rider. "What's your name?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. Clara Norwood." "I'm Bennett Pike." "You're the new girl at Morrison's store, aren't you?" She nodded weakly, surprised he knew who she was. Camp Verde was small, maybe 300 souls, but she'd mostly kept to herself since arriving, too grief-stricken and overwhelmed to socialize much. "You picked one hell of a day for a walk," Bennett said, and she couldn't tell if he was angry or amused, maybe both. "It was sunny this morning," she whispered. "Mountain weather changes faster than a card sharp's luck. You're not from around here, are you, St. Louis?" "That explains it." City folk never understand the mountains. His arm tightened around her as the horse navigated a steep section of trail. Well, Clara Norwood from St. Louis, you're lucky I was checking my trap lines. Another hour and you'd have been a frozen statue. She wanted to thank him, but exhaustion pulled at her, made her eyelids heavy. The rhythmic motion of the horse, the warmth of Bennett's body, the relief of rescue all conspired to drag her toward unconsciousness. "Stay awake," Bennett commanded, his voice sharp. "Don't you dare pass out on me." Tell me about St. Louis." "Why?" The word came out slurred. "Because if you fall asleep in this condition, you might not wake up. So talk." Clara forced her eyes open, forced her mind to focus. "It's big, busy. Lots of people and noise and buildings. The Mississippi runs right through it." "You miss it?" "No, there's nothing there for me anymore. Family, all gone." The words hurt more than the cold. "Both parents dead within a year. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. Everything reminded me of them." Bennett was quiet for a moment, then his voice came gentler. "I'm sorry." "That's a hard thing." "What about you?" Clara asked, trying to keep the conversation going, trying to stay present. "Are you from Camp Verde?" "Born in Texas. Came up here 5 years ago looking for better ranching land. Got a small spread about 2 miles outside town. Run cattle, do some trapping in winter, break horses when folks need it." "You live alone?" "Yep, just me and whatever animals are dumb enough to stick around." Despite everything, Clara felt a small smile tug at her frozen lips. "That must be lonely." "Sometimes," Bennett admitted. "But it's quiet. I like quiet." Through the snow, a structure materialized. A cabin built sturdy and low against the wind, with a lean-to stable attached to one side. Smoke rose from the chimney, which meant he'd left a fire going. Bennett guided the horse directly to the stable, dismounting quickly before reaching up to lift Clara down. Her legs buckled the moment her feet touched ground, but he caught her easily, sweeping her back into his arms. "Let me get you inside first, then I'll see to the horse," he said, kicking the cabin door open. The warmth hit Clara like a physical force. A pot-bellied stove dominated one corner of the single-room cabin, radiating blessed heat. Bennett carried her to a chair near the stove and set her down carefully, then immediately began working on her boots. They were so frozen and wet they didn't want to come off, but he persisted with firm, efficient movements. "I need to get you out of these wet clothes," Bennett said, not meeting her eyes. "You've got to warm up properly or you'll lose fingers and toes to frostbite. Maybe worse." Clara's cheeks flamed despite the cold. "I can manage, can you?" He looked at her hands, at her fingers that were white and stiff. "Because it doesn't look like you can even make a fist right now." He was right. When she tried to flex her fingers, pain shot through them and they barely moved. Tears pricked at her eyes, from pain and exhaustion, and the mortification of needing help with something so intimate. Bennett's expression softened. "I'll be a gentleman about it. I've got some long underwear and thick socks that'll be too big on you, but they're warm and dry. I'll turn around while you change." He moved to a trunk against the wall, pulling out the promised clothes, then set them on the chair beside her. True to his word, he turned his back, moving to the stove to add more wood and set a kettle on to heat. Clara struggled with her dress. Her fingers wouldn't cooperate with the buttons, wouldn't grip the fabric properly. Frustrated tears spilled over. "I can't," she admitted, hating how weak she sounded. "My hands won't work." Bennett hesitated, then turned back around. "All right, let me help. But I'm only looking at what I need to see to get you out of these wet things." "Understood," she nodded, too miserable and cold to care much about propriety anymore. Death from exposure seemed a more immediate concern than her reputation. Bennett approached and worked the buttons of her dress with surprising deftness, his face carefully neutral, gaze focused on the task. He helped her stand on shaking legs and eased the heavy, wet dress down, then the soaked petticoats beneath. When she stood in just her chemise and drawers, both damp, he handed her a blanket. "Hold this around you," he instructed. She clutched it with clumsy hands while he turned away again. "Take off the rest and put on what I gave you. I'll keep my back turned." Clara managed it, though it took far longer than it should have. The long underwear was indeed massive on her, the sleeves extending past her fingertips, but it was blissfully dry and warm. The wool socks came up past her knees. When she was decent, she pulled the blanket around herself again and sank back into the chair. "Done," she said quietly. Bennett turned and nodded approval. "Good, now drink this." He pressed a tin cup of water into her hands, closing her stiff fingers around it. Small sips, not too fast. The water was room temperature, not hot, which disappointed her until she realized he probably knew what he was doing. She sipped obediently while Bennett hung her wet clothes on a line strung across one corner of the cabin, spreading them to dry by the stove's heat. He moved around the space with easy familiarity, a man comfortable in his own domain. The cabin was sparse but clean. A bed in one corner with neatly made blankets, a small table with 2 chairs, shelves holding supplies and a few books, a rifle mounted above the door. Through the single window, Clara could see nothing but white. "How long will the storm last?" she asked. "Hard to say. Could be a few hours, could be a couple days. These freak storms blow themselves out quick sometimes, or they settle in and make themselves at home." Bennett poured himself water and leaned against the table, studying her. "You feeling any better?" "A little. My hands hurt." "That's good actually. Means the blood's coming back. It'll hurt worse before it gets better." He paused, then asked, "You got anyone who'll worry about you not coming back tonight?" Clara shook her head. "Mrs. Morrison might wonder when I don't come down for breakfast tomorrow, but she won't panic. She thinks I'm bookish and odd anyway, always going off by myself." "You work in her store but live there too?" "I rent a room upstairs. It's small, but it's mine." Bennett was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. "You got any other family out here? Friends who came with you?" "No, I came alone. Thought maybe I could start fresh somewhere nobody knew me, somewhere I wouldn't see my parents in every corner and street." She looked down at the cup in her hands. "I suppose that sounds cowardly." "Sounds human," Bennett said simply. "Grief's a heavy thing to carry. Sometimes you need new ground to set it down on." Something in his tone made Clara look up sharply. "You sound like you know about it." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Lost my folks to a Comanche raid when I was 16. Lost my brother to fever 3 years later. So yeah, I know about it." "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. Bennett shrugged, but his eyes held old pain. "Like I said, it's a heavy thing. You learn to carry it or it buries you." They fell into silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The storm howled outside, but the cabin stayed warm and solid, a shelter against the wild. Clara's hands gradually stopped hurting quite so much, progressing from sharp stabbing pains to dull aches. Her toes tingled as feeling returned. She found herself watching Bennett as he moved about, heating beans and salt pork for a simple meal, brewing coffee that smelled like heaven. He was tall, she realized, probably just over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who worked hard every day. His hair was dark brown, a bit too long, curling slightly at his collar. His hands were scarred and calloused, capable hands that had unbuttoned her dress with unexpected gentleness. He'd shaved recently, but stubble already shadowed his jaw. When he caught her looking, Clara quickly dropped her gaze, embarrassed. "Hungry?" Bennett asked, spooning beans onto 2 tin plates. "Starving," Clara admitted, surprised to find it true. He handed her a plate and fork, then pulled the other chair close to the stove and sat down with his own meal. The beans were simple but hot and salty and good. Clara ate slowly, savoring each bite, while Bennett ate with the efficient speed of a man used to taking meals between work. When he finished, he set his plate aside and poured them both coffee. "So what were you doing out there gathering herbs in October?" Bennett asked. "Most medicinal plants are best picked earlier in the season." "I know, but I was looking for late-blooming yarrow and maybe some pine needles for tea. Mrs. Morrison asked if I could help supplement her medical supplies since the doctor's been traveling to Prescott more often." Clara wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup. "I used to help my mother with her garden. She taught me about plants, which ones heal and which ones hurt. That's useful knowledge out here. If I don't freeze to death trying to gather them," Clara said wryly. A small smile tugged at Bennett's mouth, the first she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Well, if you're planning to keep doing it, you need to learn the weather patterns. Need proper supplies, too. What were you carrying?" "Anything besides that basket." Clara felt her cheeks heat. "Just the basket." Bennett shook his head, but his expression was more amused than critical. "City girl. You need water, matches, a knife, something waterproof in case of rain or snow. Need to tell someone exactly where you're going and when you'll be back. Need to know the land well enough to find shelter fast if weather turns." "I don't know the land at all," Clara admitted. "I've barely left town except for short walks nearby." "Then you had no business going as far out as I found you." Bennett's voice turned serious. "Those foothills can be dangerous even without weather. There are mine shafts people forgot to mark, unstable ground, the occasional mountain lion or bear. You were damn lucky today, Miss Norwood." "Clara," she corrected softly, "and I know I was stupid." "Not stupid, ignorant, there's a difference. Stupid can't be fixed." He stood and refilled their coffee cups. "I'll teach you if you want. About the land, the weather signs, where to find what you're looking for safely." Clara looked up at him in surprise. "Why would you do that?" Bennett met her eyes steadily. "Because next time I might not be there to pull you out of the snow. And because," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, "because you're new here and alone and trying to make a place for yourself. I respect that." Warmth spread through Clara's chest that had nothing to do with the coffee or the stove. "Thank you," she said. "I'd like that very much." The afternoon wore on. The storm showed no signs of weakening. Bennett explained that she'd have to stay the night, that attempting to return to town in these conditions would be suicide. Clara knew he was right, but couldn't help feeling anxious about the impropriety of spending the night alone with a man in his cabin. If anyone found out, her reputation would be destroyed. Bennett seemed to sense her worry. "I'll sleep in the stable with the horse," he said. "You can have the bed, plenty of blankets to keep you warm." "I can't ask you to do that. It's your home." "You're not asking. I'm telling you that's how it's going to be." His tone left no room for argument. "Besides, I've slept in worse places. Stable's weatherproof and there's hay for bedding. I'll be fine." As evening fell, Bennett made them another simple meal, this time pan bread and dried venison rehydrated in broth. Clara found herself relaxing in his presence despite the unusual circumstances. He wasn't much for idle talk, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and genuine. He asked about her work at the store, about what books she liked to read, about whether she'd made any friends in Camp Verde yet. "Not really," Clara admitted. "The other women in town are polite, but they've got their own lives, their own families. I'm just the odd new girl from back east who keeps to herself." "Give it time," Bennett said. "Frontier folk are cautious with newcomers, but they're loyal once you prove yourself." "How do I prove myself?" "By staying. By showing you're not just some city person who'll run back east at the first hardship." He gave her a pointed look. "Course, Almost freezing to death your first winter might count as proving something, though I'm not sure what exactly." Clara laughed, surprised by the sound. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed. "That I'm either very brave or very foolish. Maybe both," Bennett said, but his eyes were kind. When full darkness came, Bennett banked the fire in the stove so it would burn through the night without overheating the cabin. He gave Clara an extra blanket, showed her where the chamber pot was tucked discreetly behind a curtain, and made sure she had water within reach. "You need anything in the night, bang on the wall 3 times and I'll hear it in the stable," he instructed. "Otherwise, sleep well. Storm should blow through by morning." "Bennett," Clara said as he reached for the door. He turned back. "Thank you for everything. You saved my life today." Something flickered in his gray eyes, some emotion she couldn't quite name. "Well," he said gruffly, "couldn't very well leave you out there, could I? Sleep well, Clara." Then he was gone, cold air rushing in briefly before the door closed behind him. Clara stood alone in the warm cabin, surrounded by this stranger's possessions, wearing his clothes, safe because of his kindness. She climbed into his bed, which smelled faintly of leather and wood smoke and something uniquely masculine, and pulled the blankets up to her chin. Through the small window, she could see the stable's dim outline, could imagine Bennett bedding down in the hay. Her heart did something strange in her chest, a flutter and squeeze that she didn't want to examine too closely. She'd known this man for less than 12 hours. He'd seen her in her underclothes, had unbuttoned her dress, had held her body against his for the ride back to safety. There was an intimacy to it all that both frightened and thrilled her. Clara closed her eyes and listened to the wind. For the first time since leaving St. Louis, she didn't feel quite so alone. She fell asleep thinking about gray eyes and gentle hands and a voice that said her name like it mattered. Morning arrived with startling brightness. Clara woke to sun streaming through the window. The storm vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. She sat up, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, then remembered everything in a rush. The snow, Bennett Pike, the rescue. She climbed out of bed, pleased to find her hands and feet working properly again, only slight residual stiffness remaining. Her dress and undergarments hung by the stove, completely dry now. Clara changed quickly, grateful to be back in her own clothes despite their wrinkled state. She was just finishing the last button when the cabin door opened and Bennett stepped in, bringing cold air and the smell of fresh snow with him. "Morning," he said, stomping snow from his boots. "Sleep all right?" "Very well, thank you." "How was the stable?" "Cold but survivable." He moved to the stove, stirring up the coals and adding fresh wood. "I checked outside. We got about 18 inches, but the sun's strong. If we give it a few hours to melt off the trails a bit, I can take you back to town." "I appreciate it," Clara said, then hesitated. "I don't have any way to repay you for all this. For saving me, for the food and shelter." "Don't want repayment," Bennett interrupted. "You do the same for someone in need." "I'd like to think so, but I don't know if I'd be capable of it. I certainly didn't do a very good job of taking care of myself yesterday." Bennett looked at her for a long moment, then said, "You made a mistake. Doesn't make you incapable, makes you human. We all mess up when we're learning new territory." He started making coffee, the familiar morning ritual. "Besides, you kept your head once I found you. Didn't panic, didn't fight me, stayed conscious when I needed you to. That counts for something." They shared a simple breakfast of leftover bread and coffee. Then Bennett saddled his horse while Clara tidied the cabin, making his bed with careful precision and washing their few dishes. It felt strange and domestic, this small act of caretaking in a man's home. But it also felt right somehow, like a small repayment even if he didn't want one. The ride back to Camp Verde took twice as long as the frantic journey through the storm. The sun had indeed begun melting the snow, but the trails were slushy and treacherous. Bennett kept the horse at a careful walk, one arm around Clara's waist to keep her steady in the saddle. She tried not to think about how natural it felt to be held by him, how safe she felt in his embrace. Camp Verde appeared ahead, its scattered buildings peaceful in the morning light. A few people were out shoveling snow, staring in surprise as Bennett rode through with Clara on his saddle. She could practically see the gossip forming in their minds, and her stomach clenched with anxiety. Bennett seemed to sense her tension. "Let them talk," he said quietly near her ear. "Anyone with sense will understand the situation. Anyone without sense isn't worth worrying about." He rode directly to the general store and dismounted, then helped Clara down. Mrs. Morrison burst out of the store's front door, her round face creased with relief. "Clara." "Oh, thank heavens. I was so worried when you didn't come back last night." She rushed over, taking Clara's hands in hers. "Where were you? Are you all right?" "I got caught in the storm yesterday," Clara explained. "I was in the foothills and couldn't find my way back. Mr. Pike found me and took me to his cabin for shelter." Mrs. Morrison's eyes went wide, darting between Clara and Bennett with clear speculation. Oh my. Well, that was very fortunate. Very fortunate I didn't freeze to death, yes," Clara said firmly, meeting the older woman's gaze. "Mr. Pike saved my life. Of course. Mrs. Morrison patted her hand. "I'm just glad you're safe, dear. Come inside, let me get you some hot tea." Clara glanced back at Bennett, who had already remounted his horse. "Thank you again," she called to him, "for everything." He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. "Remember what I said about learning the land." "I will." Something passed between them, some unspoken understanding, and then Bennett wheeled his horse around and headed back toward his ranch. Clara watched until he disappeared from view, feeling strangely bereft. The next few days passed in a blur of gossip and sideways glances. Word spread quickly through Camp Verde about Clara's overnight stay at Bennett Pike's cabin, and opinion was divided. Some folks, particularly the older women, were scandalized and treated Clara with cool disapproval. Others, especially those who knew Bennett, defended the situation as simple frontier practicality. You didn't leave someone to die in a blizzard over worries about propriety. Clara kept her head high and went about her work at the store, refusing to show shame for something that hadn't been shameful. She'd done nothing wrong. Neither had Bennett. They'd both simply survived an unexpected disaster as best they could. A week after the storm, Clara was restocking shelves when the bell above the store's door chimed. She looked up and her heart did that strange flutter skip it had been doing whenever she thought about Bennett Pike, because there he stood, hat in his hands, looking somehow larger in the confines of the store than he had in his cabin. "Mr. Pike," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "What brings you to town?" "Needed supplies," he said, but his eyes said something else. "And I wanted to check that you were all right, that you recovered from your ordeal." "I'm perfectly well, thank you. No frostbite, no lingering effects." "Good, that's good." Bennett shifted his weight, uncharacteristically uncertain. "I also wondered if you were still interested in learning the land. I've got some free time this week if you want to start." Clara's pulse quickened. "I'd like that very much. Tomorrow afternoon. I could meet you here, take you out to some of the safer areas, show you what to look for. Tomorrow afternoon is perfect. I'm off work at 3. I'll be here at 3 then." Bennett put his hat back on, nodded politely, and turned to leave without purchasing anything. "Mr. Pike," Clara called after him. He turned back. "You said you needed supplies." A faint smile crossed his face. "Did I? Must have forgotten what I came for." And then he was gone, leaving Clara staring after him with a ridiculous grin she couldn't quite suppress. Mrs. Morrison appeared from the back room, eyebrows raised. "What was that about?" "He's going to teach me about the terrain around here," Clara said, trying to sound casual, "so I don't get lost again." Mrs. Morrison's expression was knowing. "Bennett Pike's a good man. Quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but honest and hardworking. His ranch is small but profitable. He's got no debts I know of and no bad reputation." "I appreciate the information," Clara said dryly, "but he's just being neighborly." "If you say so, dear." Mrs. Morrison's smile suggested she believed nothing of the sort. The next afternoon, Clara changed from her work dress into a simpler calico, one better suited for walking outdoors. She'd purchased sturdy boots the day after the storm, along with a warm jacket and gloves. She wasn't going to be caught unprepared again. At precisely 3 o'clock, Bennett rode up on his chestnut gelding, leading a second horse, a gentle-looking bay mare. "Thought you might want to ride instead of walk," he said by way of greeting. "This is Rosie. She's calm and easy, good for beginners." "I've never ridden before," Clara admitted nervously. "I'll teach you. Come on." For the next 2 hours, Bennett patiently instructed Clara in the basics of horsemanship. How to approach the horse, how to mount, how to sit balanced in the saddle, how to use the reins and legs to communicate. Rosie was indeed patient, seeming to understand she carried a novice. By the end of the lesson, Clara could walk the mare in a reasonably straight line and even managed a few minutes of slow trotting. "You're a natural," Bennett said, and the approval in his voice warmed her more than it probably should have. They rode out beyond the edge of town, Bennett pointing out landmarks and explaining the lay of the land. He showed her how to read the angle of the sun to determine direction, how to recognize certain rock formations that marked important locations, where the reliable water sources were. He pointed out animal tracks in the remaining patches of snow, identifying each one. Deer, rabbit, coyote, one set that might have been a small bear. "The key is paying attention," Bennett explained as they paused on a ridge overlooking the valley. "Most people who get lost do it because they're not watching where they're going, not noting landmarks. You've got to be present, aware of your surroundings every minute." Clara nodded, trying to absorb everything. But she was also acutely aware of Bennett beside her, the way his hands rested easy on his saddle horn, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon with practiced vigilance. He belonged out here in a way she'd never belonged anywhere. "What made you come to Arizona?" Clara asked. "You said you were born in Texas." Bennett was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "After I lost my brother, I couldn't stay there anymore. Too many ghosts, like you said about St. Louis. I heard there was good grazing land up here, not too crowded yet, and I needed space. Needed to build something that was mine, something that wasn't haunted by the past. Did it work? Mostly." He glanced at her. "Some ghosts follow you no matter how far you run, but at least here I've got room to breathe around them." Clara understood that more than she could say. They rode a bit further, Bennett showing her the path to his ranch, pointing out fence lines and cattle in the distance. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon when they finally turned back toward town. "Thank you for today," Clara said as they approached Camp Verde. "I learned a lot." "We'll do it again," Bennett said. "Once a week maybe, until you feel confident out here. I'd like that." Something had shifted between them over the course of the afternoon, a friendship forming, tentative but real. When they said goodbye in front of the store, Clara found herself already looking forward to their next lesson. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Every few days, Bennett would come to town and take Clara riding. He taught her to read weather signs in the clouds and wind, showed her where the best medicinal plants grew and when to harvest them, explained which areas to avoid because of unstable ground or dangerous wildlife. Clara proved an eager student, soaking up knowledge like drought-dry earth soaking up rain. But beyond the practical lessons, they talked. Bennett wasn't much for idle chatter, but when he did speak, it was always something worth hearing. He told her about his time in Texas, about learning to work cattle from his father, about the Comanche raid that had killed his parents, and how he and his brother had barely escaped. He told her about building his ranch from nothing, about hard winters and dry summers, and the satisfaction of seeing his small herd grow year by year. Clara shared her own stories. Her childhood in St. Louis, her mother's garden and her father's bookshop. The happy years before illness crept in. The terrible months of watching her father waste away, then her mother simply losing the will to live. The loneliness of being the last one left, surrounded by memories and unable to escape them. "You think it was cowardly?" Clara asked one afternoon as they sat beside a creek, letting the horses drink. "Running away like I did?" Bennett considered the question seriously. "No, I think it was survival. Sometimes staying is brave and sometimes leaving is brave. You've got to know which one you need." "Which one did you need?" "Leaving. Definitely leaving." He picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water. "But I think I'm done running now. I've found where I'm supposed to be." Clara watched the ripples spread from where the stone had touched the water. "I'm not sure where I'm supposed to be yet. You'll figure it out." Bennett glanced at her, his gray eyes warm. "You're stronger than you think, Clara Norwood." November arrived, bringing cooler temperatures but beautiful clear days. Clara's confidence on horseback grew. She could now ride without constant supervision, could handle Rosie in a trot, and even a controlled canter. More importantly, she'd learned the land well enough that she no longer feared getting lost. She knew which ridge led where, which valleys held water, which paths led back to town. She'd also come to realize, with a mixture of excitement and terror, that she was falling in love with Bennett Pike. It had crept up on her gradually, disguised as friendship and gratitude. But somewhere along the way, friendship had transformed into something deeper. She found herself thinking about him constantly, looking forward to their riding lessons with an anticipation that had nothing to do with learning and everything to do with simply being near him. She noticed small things, the way his hair curled at his collar, the rare smile that softened his weathered face, the gentleness in his scarred hands when he adjusted her saddle or helped her dismount. Clara had no idea if he felt the same way. Bennett was kind to her, attentive during their lessons, but he was also careful to maintain propriety. He never touched her more than necessary, never said anything that could be construed as romantic. Maybe he was just being neighborly, as she told Mrs. Morrison. Maybe rescuing foolish city girls and teaching them frontier survival was simply what he did. The uncertainty gnawed at her. She'd never been in love before. The boys back in St. Louis had never interested her much, too soft and pampered, concerned with social standing and family connections. Bennett was different. He was real in a way those boys had never been, forged by hardship into something strong and genuine. Clara was restocking the store's dry goods one afternoon, lost in thought about Bennett, when Mrs. Morrison approached with a concerned expression. "Dear, I need to talk to you about something," the older woman said, keeping her voice low even though they were alone in the store. "What is it?" "It's about Bennett Pike." Mrs. Morrison twisted her hands together. "People are talking, Clara. About how much time you spend with him, about the two of you riding out alone together." "We're not doing anything wrong," Clara said, feeling her defenses rise. "He's teaching me about the land, that's all." "I know, dear, and I believe you, but you know how people are. Some of the ladies have been suggesting that Bennett's taken advantage of your gratitude over being rescued. Others are saying you're trying to trap him into marriage by compromising yourself. Anger flared hot in Clara's chest. That's ridiculous. I'm not trying to trap anyone, and Bennett has been nothing but a perfect gentleman. I believe you, Mrs. Morrison repeated, but Clara, you need to understand how it looks. An unmarried woman spending so much time alone with an unmarried man, neither of you with family to chaperone or vouch for you. If this continues, your reputation will be damaged beyond repair, and probably his too. So what am I supposed to do? Stop learning how to survive out here. Stop seeing the only friend I've made in Camp Verde. Mrs. Morrison's expression turned sympathetic. Is that what he is to you, just a friend? The question hit too close to home. Clara looked away. What else would he be? Oh, sweetheart. Mrs. Morrison touched her arm gently. I've seen how you look at him, and I've seen how he looks at you, though I'm not sure he's admitted it to himself yet. If there's something real between you two, maybe it's time to acknowledge it properly. But these secret riding lessons, this ambiguous situation, it's not fair to either of you. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know what he wants. We don't talk about things like that. Then maybe you should. Mrs. Morrison squeezed her arm. Bennett Pike is a good man, but he's been alone a long time. Sometimes men like that forget how to reach for what they want. Sometimes they need a little encouragement. Before Clara could respond, the bell above the door chimed. She turned, and there was Bennett, as if summoned by their conversation. His eyes found hers immediately, and something in his expression made Clara's breath catch. Mr. Pike, Mrs. Morrison said warmly. Perfect timing. Clara was just finishing her shift for the day. Bennett's gaze flickered to the older woman, then back to Clara. I was hoping you might have time for a ride. There's something I'd like to show you. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. She grabbed her jacket and gloves, acutely aware of Mrs. Morrison's knowing smile as she followed Bennett out to where the horses waited. They rode in silence for a while, heading in a direction they'd never gone before. Clara noticed they were traveling toward Bennett's ranch, and her heart began to beat faster. He'd never taken her there before, had always kept their lessons in neutral territory. The ranch appeared ahead, modest but well-maintained. A sturdy cabin larger than the one where Clara had sheltered from the storm. A barn and several outbuildings, corrals where cattle grazed peacefully. Bennett dismounted and helped Clara down, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. Come inside, he said quietly. Clara followed him into the cabin, which was similar in layout to his old one but larger, with more furniture and a second room that appeared to be a bedroom. Bennett took off his hat and hung it on a peg, then stood for a moment with his back to her, seeming to gather his thoughts. I've been hearing talk in town, he said finally, turning to face her. About us. About how it looks the time we spend together. Clara's heart sank. I know, Mrs. Morrison just told me. I don't give a damn what most people think, Bennett said, his voice rough. But I give a damn about your reputation, about how this affects you. So you want to stop the lessons? Clara tried to keep the hurt out of her voice. No. He crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides, standing close enough that Clara had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. I want to stop pretending that teaching you to ride is the only reason I want to see you every week. Clara's breath caught. What do you mean? Bennett reached up, cupping her face with one calloused hand, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. I mean, I've been half in love with you since I pulled you out of that blizzard, Clara Norwood. I mean, I think about you every damn day, worry about you, want to know everything about you. I mean, I'm tired of keeping my distance and pretending I don't want more than friendship. Joy flooded through Clara, so intense it made her dizzy. Then why have you been keeping your distance? Because I didn't want to take advantage. You were grateful for the rescue, and I didn't want you to confuse gratitude with something deeper. I wanted to give you time to figure out what you felt without me pushing." His gray eyes searched hers. "So I'm asking now, plain and honest, is there any chance you might feel the same way? Because if there's not, I'll step back and we can forget I said anything." But if there is, Clara didn't let him finish. She rose on her toes and kissed him, cutting off his words with her answer. For a moment Bennett froze in surprise, then he made a low sound in his throat and kissed her back with a fervor that made her knees weak. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and Clara melted into him, into the heat and strength and rightness of being held by this man. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Bennett rested his forehead against hers. "I'll take that as a yes," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Yes," Clara confirmed, laughing breathlessly. "Yes, I feel the same way. I've been falling in love with you for weeks." Bennett pulled back enough to look at her properly, his expression tender and fierce all at once. "I don't have much to offer. A small ranch, a simple life. But what I've got I want to share with you if you'll have me." "Are you asking me to marry you?" Clara's heart was racing. "Eventually, if you'll let me court you proper first. I want to do this right, Clara. I want everyone in Camp Verde to know you're spoken for, that my intentions are honorable." He brushed a strand of hair back from her face. "But yeah, eventually I'm asking you to be my wife, to build a life here with me." Clara thought about her small room above the store, about the loneliness that had haunted her since leaving St. Louis. She thought about this man who had saved her life, who had patiently taught her how to survive in this harsh land, who looked at her like she was something precious. She thought about the way she felt when she was with him, safe, valued, understood. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to courting and yes to eventually, yes to all of it." Bennett kissed her again, softer this time, sweet and lingering. When he pulled back, his eyes shone with something that looked suspiciously like tears. "Thank you," he said roughly, "for taking a chance on me." "Thank you for finding me in the snow," Clara replied, "for not leaving me lost." They stood there in his cabin, holding each other as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, and Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Home. Not a place, but a person. Not safety from the world, but the courage to face it together. Bennett insisted on riding back to town with Clara before dark, unwilling to risk her reputation further by keeping her at his ranch after nightfall. But before they left, he gave her a tour of the property, showing her the cattle operation, the garden plot where he grew vegetables in summer, the creek that ran through his land providing reliable water year-round. "It's not much," he said, almost apologetically, "but it's mine. Built it all myself over the past 5 years. It's wonderful," Clara said honestly. "You should be proud of what you've accomplished. I'd be more proud if I had someone to share it with." Bennett took her hand, threading their fingers together. "I've been alone a long time, Clara. I'd almost gotten used to it. Then you stumbled into my life half frozen and lost, and suddenly being alone didn't seem good enough anymore." They rode back to Camp Verde with the easy closeness of people who'd stopped pretending, their horses walking side by side, their hands occasionally brushing. When they reached the store, Bennett helped Clara down and then, right there in the middle of town where anyone could see, he kissed her goodbye with clear, deliberate intent. "Let them talk," his kiss said. "Let them know she's mine and I'm hers, Mrs." Morrison was waiting when Clara came inside, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Well," Clara couldn't stop smiling, "he's going to court me, properly, and eventually, if things go well, he wants to marry me." The older woman let out a delighted laugh and pulled Clara into a hug. "Oh, I'm so happy for you, dear. Bennett Pike is a fine man. He'll take good care of you." "I think I'll take good care of him too," Clara said. "That's how it should work, isn't it? Both people caring for each other. That's exactly how it should work, Mrs. Morrison stepped back, her expression turning serious. But Clara, you should know this won't quiet all the gossip. Some folks will still talk, especially since things moved so fast between you two. Then let them talk, Clara said, echoing Bennett's earlier words. I'm tired of worrying about what people think. I'm happy, and that's what matters. And she was happy, radiantly so. Over the following weeks, Bennett courted Clara with old-fashioned determination. He came to town 3 times a week, taking her to dinner at the small restaurant near the livery stable, walking with her through Camp Verde in full view of everyone, attending church services on Sunday with Clara at his side. He brought her small gifts, a set of leather gloves perfectly sized for her hands, a warm scarf in deep blue that matched her eyes, wildflowers that had somehow survived the November frost. The town's opinion gradually shifted. Most folks could see that Bennett and Clara were genuinely in love, not engaged in some scandalous affair. The relationship was proper and public, exactly what courtship should be. A few stubborn souls remained disapproving, but their voices grew quieter as weeks passed without any hint of impropriety. Clara met some of Bennett's neighbors, other ranchers and their families who lived in the scattered homesteads around Camp Verde. They welcomed her warmly, clearly pleased that Bennett had finally found someone. She learned that he was well respected in the community, known for being honest in his dealings and generous when neighbors needed help. He helped us through a rough patch last winter, one rancher's wife told Clara. Our cattle got into spoiled grain and we lost half the herd. Bennett lent us breeding stock to rebuild, didn't ask for anything in return. That's the kind of man he is. Clara treasured these glimpses into Bennett's character, these confirmations of what she already knew in her heart, that he was good all the way through, not just to her but to everyone. December arrived with occasional dustings of snow, but nothing like the freak blizzard that had brought them together. Clara spent Christmas Day at Bennett's ranch, the two of them cooking a simple meal together and exchanging modest gifts. She gave him a shirt she'd sewn herself, carefully measured and stitched during her evenings alone. He gave her a beautiful pocket knife with her initials carved into the wooden handle. For when you're out gathering herbs, he explained. So you can cut cleanly and always find your way home. He showed her the tiny compass built into the handle's end. See, no matter where you wander, you'll know which direction to go. Clara threw her arms around his neck, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of it. It's perfect, thank you. They sat together by his fireplace, Clara tucked against Bennett's side, his arm around her shoulders. Outside, snow began to fall gently, nothing like the violent storm that had started everything, just a peaceful white blanket softening the world. Are you warm enough? Bennett asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Very warm, Clara snuggled closer. Though I suppose I should be grateful for blizzards now. If it hadn't snowed that day, we might never have met. We'd have met eventually. Camp Verde's not that big. But would you have noticed me? Would I have noticed you? Bennett considered this. Maybe not right away, but I think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are meant to happen. You believe in fate. I believe that you were supposed to come into my life, Clara Norwood. Whether that's fate or luck or God's plan, I don't much care. I'm just grateful it happened. They talked about the future as the snow fell outside, about when they might marry, about what their life together would look like. Bennett wanted to wait until spring, wanted to give Clara more time to be certain, but she insisted she was already certain. I knew the day you asked me, Clara said. Maybe I knew even before that. When have I ever been uncertain about you? Then we'll marry in the spring, Bennett agreed. April maybe, when the weather's good and the wildflowers are blooming. I want you to have a proper wedding, Clara, something to remember. I don't need anything fancy, just you and me and our promise to each other. You'll get that, Bennett assured her. But you'll also get flowers and a new dress and anyone in town who wants to celebrate with us. I want everyone to know how proud I am that you chose me. As winter deepened, Clara spent more time at the ranch, helping with chores and learning the rhythms of Bennett's life. She discovered she had a knack for working with the animals, particularly the horses. Bennett taught her how to curry and groom them, how to check their hooves for stones, how to read their moods and body language. "You're a natural," he said one afternoon, watching her work with a young colt that had been skittish with everyone else. "Horses sense when someone's genuine. They trust you." "Maybe because I was lost and scared like they sometimes are," Clara suggested. "Maybe they recognize a kindred spirit." Bennett pulled her close, kissing her soundly. "You're not lost anymore." "No," Clara agreed, smiling against his lips. "I'm found." In February, Bennett took Clara to Prescott on a supply run, the two of them making the journey together in his wagon. It was the furthest Clara had been from Camp Verde since arriving, and she enjoyed seeing more of the territory. Prescott was larger and busier than Camp Verde, with actual streets and numerous businesses. Bennett took her to a dressmaker's shop and insisted on buying fabric and supplies for a wedding dress. Clara protested the expense, but Bennett was adamant. "You're only getting married once," he said firmly. "You deserve something beautiful." They spent the whole day in Prescott, visiting various shops, eating at a restaurant that had actual tablecloths and multiple courses. Bennett held Clara's hand openly as they walked, introduced her as his intended wife to anyone they encountered. Clara glowed under his pride and affection, feeling cherished in a way she'd never experienced before. On the journey home, with stars brilliant overhead and the wagon creaking beneath them, Bennett asked Clara something that had clearly been on his mind. "You have regrets about leaving St. Louis, about choosing this life?" "None," Clara said honestly. "I thought I'd lost everything when my parents died. Thought I'd always feel empty and alone. But then I found you, or you found me, and suddenly I had something to build toward again. A future that wasn't just surviving day to day." "I know what you mean," Bennett said quietly. "After my brother died, I figured I'd just work the ranch until I got old and died myself. Didn't think about happiness or partnership or any of that. Then you came stumbling into my life, half frozen and stubborn as hell, and everything changed." "I wasn't stubborn," Clara protested. "You were absolutely stubborn. You could barely move, but you still tried to walk on your own, still tried to undress yourself, even though your fingers didn't work." Bennett's voice was warm with affection. "That's when I knew you were someone special. Most city folks would have panicked and cried, but not you. You kept fighting." "I was terrified," Clara admitted, "but I didn't want to die, and once you found me, I didn't want to be a burden." "You've never been a burden. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, then Clara asked, "Do you want children?" Bennett glanced at her, his expression softening. "I do. Always figured I would have been a father by now, but life didn't work out that way. Do you want them?" "Yes, I want a family. I want to fill that ranch house with noise and love and chaos." "Then that's what we'll do," Bennett promised. "We'll build the family neither of us has any more. We'll make our own." April arrived with an explosion of color across the Arizona landscape. Wildflowers bloomed in impossible profusion, painting the hills in shades of yellow, purple, and red. The weather turned warm and perfect, with clear blue skies and gentle breezes. Bennett and Clara chose the last Saturday in April for their wedding, giving Clara time to finish her dress and make preparations. The ceremony was held outdoors near Bennett's ranch, beneath a makeshift arbor that several neighbors had helped construct and decorate with fresh flowers. Nearly everyone from Camp Verde attended, along with ranchers and their families from miles around. Clara wore her new dress, a simple but elegant gown in cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. She'd woven wildflowers into her dark hair, their bright colors vivid against her curls. Bennett stood waiting in his best suit, his hair freshly trimmed, his face clean-shaven. When he saw Clara walking toward him on Mrs. Morrison's arm, his eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. The ceremony itself was brief, conducted by a circuit preacher who traveled between small settlements. The vows were traditional, but they meant everything when spoken with such fierce sincerity. Bennett's voice shook slightly when he promised to love and cherish Clara for the rest of his life. Clara's hands trembled when she slipped the simple gold band onto his finger. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher said with a warm smile. "Bennett, you may kiss your bride." Bennett cradled Clara's face in his hands, his touch achingly gentle, and kissed her with a tenderness that made several women in the audience reach for their handkerchiefs. Clara kissed him back with equal feeling, pouring everything she felt into that moment: gratitude, joy, love, promise. When they pulled apart, both smiling through tears, the gathered crowd erupted in applause and cheers. There was music and dancing, a feast of contributed dishes spread across long tables, toasts and well-wishes that lasted until sunset. Clara danced with her new husband, with helpful neighbors, with Mrs. Morrison, who cried happily through the entire waltz. "You look radiant, dear," the older woman said. "I'm so happy for you both." "Thank you for everything," Clara told her. "For giving me a job when I first arrived, for your advice, for being a friend when I needed one." "Oh, hush now. You're going to make me cry even harder." Mrs. Morrison squeezed her hands. "You and Bennett are going to be very happy together. I know it in my bones." As evening fell and guests began departing, Bennett and Clara finally found themselves alone. They stood together on the porch of their cabin, watching the last traces of sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Mrs. Pike," Bennett said, testing out her new name. "How does it feel?" "Perfect," Clara replied, leaning into his embrace. "Everything feels perfect." Bennett turned her in his arms, his expression serious despite the joy in his eyes. "I'm going to do everything I can to make you happy, Clara, to build a good life for us. I promise you that." "I know you will." "And I promise the same." Clara reached up to touch his face, marveling that she had the right to do so freely now, that this remarkable man was truly hers. "We're going to be so happy, Bennett. I can feel it." They went inside together, beginning their married life in the cabin that would be their home. Outside, the Arizona night settled in with its familiar sounds: wind in the cottonwoods, distant coyote calls, the soft lowing of cattle in their corrals. Inside, two people who had both been lost had finally found home in each other's arms. The first year of marriage was an adjustment, but a joyful one. Clara learned the full scope of running a ranch, throwing herself into the work with determination. She proved adept at the accounting side, organizing Bennett's financial records with the same skills she'd used at the store. She took over the garden completely, expanding it and using her knowledge of plants to grow both food and medicinal herbs. Bennett, for his part, learned to share his space and his life after years of solitude. He discovered he liked coming home to someone, liked having Clara's input on ranch decisions, liked the simple domestic pleasures of shared meals and evening conversations. He was patient with her learning curve, never frustrated when she made mistakes, always ready to teach. They had their disagreements, of course. Clara thought Bennett took too many risks with difficult horses. Bennett thought Clara worked too hard in the garden during the hottest part of the day. But they learned to communicate, to compromise, to never go to bed angry. The love between them deepened from the initial passionate rush into something steady and enduring. In the fall, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She told Bennett one evening after supper, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He went completely still for a moment, his eyes widening, then a smile broke across his face like sunrise. "Really? You're sure?" "I'm sure. The doctor in Prescott confirmed it yesterday." Bennett swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around before setting her down carefully, as if she'd suddenly become fragile. "We're having a baby. Clara, we're having a baby." They held each other, overwhelmed by joy and anticipation and a touch of fear at the responsibility ahead. But mostly joy. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Clara remained healthy and energetic through the winter months, though Bennett fussed over her constantly, insisting she not overwork, that she rest frequently, that she eat enough. It was endearing even when it was exasperating. "I'm pregnant, not broken," Clara told him one afternoon after he'd practically ordered her to sit down while he finished the dishes. "I know, but you're carrying our child. That's precious cargo." Bennett dried his hands and came to kneel beside her chair, placing his hand on her swelling belly. "I just want to take care of you both." Clara's irritation melted away. She covered his hand with hers. "I love you, you know, even when you're ridiculously overprotective." "Good, because I'm not planning to stop." Their daughter was born in May of 1886, arriving during a warm spring night with Mrs. Morrison serving as midwife. The labor was long and difficult, and Bennett spent most of it pacing outside the bedroom, nearly frantic with worry. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, he burst through the door before Mrs. Morrison could call him in. "Clara." He was at her side immediately, taking her hand, his face pale with concern. "Are you all right?" "I'm wonderful," Clara said tiredly, her hair damp with sweat but her smile radiant. "Come meet your daughter." Mrs. Morrison placed the baby in Bennett's arms, the tiny girl wrapped in soft blankets. He stared down at her in wonder at her scrunched-up face and dark fuzz of hair, her miniature fingers curled into fists. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Clara, she's absolutely perfect." They named her Rose after the gentle mare that had helped teach Clara to ride. Rose Pike proved to be a healthy, happy baby with her father's gray eyes and her mother's stubborn determination. Bennett was a devoted father, walking the floor with Rose when she cried at night, changing her diapers without complaint, singing her off-key lullabies that made Clara laugh. As Rose grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Bennett's cattle herd expanded, his reputation as a skilled horse trainer spread, and Clara's medicinal herb business supplemented their income nicely. They added a room onto the cabin to give Rose her own space, built a proper chicken coop, and fenced additional pasture. Life wasn't always easy. There were droughts that tested them, harsh winters that took some cattle, illnesses that kept them up nights with worry. But they faced everything together, drawing strength from each other and from the family they'd built. When Rose was 3, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time Bennett was slightly less frantic, having been through it once before, though no less protective. Their second child, a son they named Thomas, arrived in the winter of 1889, healthy and loud and demanding. Bennett held his son with the same wonder he'd shown with Rose, tears tracking down his weathered face. "A boy. Clara, we have a boy." "Thomas Bennett Pike," Clara said softly, watching her husband cradle their son. "Do you like it?" "I love it. I love all of this." "You, Rose Thomas, this life we've built." Bennett looked at her with such open devotion it made her heart ache. "You gave me everything, Clara. You know that." "We gave each other everything," Clara corrected. "That's what love is." The years continued to pass, marked by the familiar rhythms of ranch life and child rearing. Rose grew into a bright, fearless girl who could ride almost before she could walk and followed her father everywhere. Thomas was quieter, more thoughtful, but with a determination that matched his mother's. Together, the four of them created the noisy, chaotic, loving family both Bennett and Clara had dreamed of. Sometimes, during quiet moments, Clara would think back to that October day in 1884 when she'd wandered into the foothills gathering herbs, when the freak snowstorm had descended, and she'd been certain she would die. She thought about how lost she'd felt, how alone, how convinced that her life would never hold joy again after her parents' deaths. She thought about Bennett finding her in the blizzard, about his strong arms and steady presence, about how he'd saved her life in more ways than one. The snow had made her lost, but the cowboy had made her found, and in finding her, he'd found himself too on their 10th wedding anniversary. Bennett took Clara riding to the spot where he'd first found her in the snow. It was spring again, the hills covered in wildflowers instead of white. They dismounted and stood together, looking out over the valley that had become their home. "You ever wonder how different things would have been?" Bennett asked, his arm around Clara's waist. "If that storm hadn't happened, if I hadn't been checking trap lines that day." "Sometimes," Clara admitted, "but I don't think the specifics matter as much as what we did with the opportunity. The storm brought us together, but we chose to build something from that meeting. We chose each other every day since. And I'll keep choosing you," Bennett said, turning to face her. "Every day for the rest of my life." Clara rose on her toes to kiss him, this man who'd rescued her from the snow and then loved her through all the seasons that followed. Behind them, in the distance, they could see their ranch, their home, the smoke rising from the chimney where Rose was probably making lunch under Mrs. Morrison's supervision while Thomas napped. Everything they'd built together, everything they'd become. "I love you," Clara whispered against Bennett's lips. "I love you too," he replied. "My city girl who learned to be a rancher's wife." "Your wife who was lost in the snow and found by a cowboy," Clara corrected with a smile. They rode back home together through the spring afternoon, their horses walking side by side, their hands occasionally touching. Back to the life they'd created, to the children who needed them, to the future that stretched ahead full of promise. That evening, after Rose and Thomas were tucked into bed and the ranch was quiet, Bennett and Clara sat together on their porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. This was Clara's favorite time of day, these peaceful moments when the work was done and they could simply be together. "Tell me again," she said softly, leaning against Bennett's shoulder. "Tell you what? How you felt when you first found me in the snow." Bennett was quiet for a moment, remembering. "Terrified," he admitted. "I saw this figure collapsed in a snowdrift and my heart just stopped. I thought you might already be dead. Then when I got close and saw you were alive, saw your face, I felt this overwhelming need to save you, not just out of duty but because something in me recognized something in you." "Love at first sight," Clara teased gently. "Maybe not love right away. But recognition, like my soul knew yours even if my head hadn't figured it out yet." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Why do you like hearing this story?" "Because it reminds me that good things can come from terrible situations. That day was one of the worst of my life, until it became one of the best. If I hadn't gotten lost, if you hadn't found me, we might never have had all of this. Then I'm grateful for freak snowstorms," Bennett said, "and for foolish city girls who don't check weather before going herb gathering." Clara laughed and swatted his arm. "I was not foolish, I was inexperienced. You were both. But you learned. You always learn, Clara. That's one of the things I love most about you. You don't give up, you adapt and overcome." They sat together in comfortable silence, wrapped in blankets against the cool evening air, watching the stars multiply overhead. Inside the cabin, their children slept safely. Around them, the ranch they'd built together stood strong. The cattle were settled in their pastures, the horses dozing in their stable, the chickens roosting in their coop. "You think we'll add more rooms?" Clara asked. "To the cabin," Bennett looked at her sharply. "Clara, are you saying, not yet, but maybe, someday, I like our family?" "I wouldn't mind it getting a little bigger." A slow smile spread across Bennett's face. "I wouldn't mind that either. 2 more rooms maybe. One for another baby when the time comes, one for guests when people visit." "You're already planning it, aren't you?" "Maybe." Bennett pulled her closer. "I like planning our future together. I like knowing we have years and years ahead of us still." "We do," Clara confirmed. "Years and years of this, of us, of our family, of building something lasting." The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Summer brought heat and hard work in the fields. Fall brought harvest and preparations for winter. Winter brought snow and cold, but also cozy evenings by the fire. Spring brought renewal and new life. Through it all, Bennett and Clara's love remained constant, the bedrock upon which everything else was built. Rose grew into a young woman as spirited and capable as her mother, as steady and strong as her father. She could rope a calf and birth a foal, could ride like the wind and shoot straight when needed. But she could also read poetry and play the piano that Bennett had surprised Clara with on their 5th anniversary. She was the perfect blend of both her parents. Thomas grew more slowly, taking his time to consider everything carefully before acting. He had his mother's way with plants and growing things, expanding the garden until it was large enough to supply not just their family but several neighbors. He had his father's patience with animals, able to gentle even the most skittish horse with quiet persistence. In 1895, 11 years after that fateful snowstorm, Clara gave birth to their 3rd child, another daughter they named Grace. By then, Rose was 9 and Thomas was 6, both old enough to be excited about their new sister rather than jealous. Grace arrived during spring, her birth easier than the previous 2, and she proved to be a calm, happy baby who rarely fussed. Bennett, now 41 years old and graying slightly at his temples, looked at his family with profound satisfaction. 3 healthy children, a wife he loved more with each passing year, a prosperous ranch that provided well for them all. It was more than he'd ever imagined having back when he'd been alone and lonely, convinced that solitude was his permanent condition. "Thank you," he told Clara one night after Grace had finally fallen asleep and they lay together in their bed. "For what?" Clara asked, her head on his shoulder. "For all of this. For saying yes when I asked to court you, for marrying me, for these beautiful children, for making this house a home." Clara propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "You act like I did it all alone. Bennett, you gave me just as much. You gave me a reason to stop grieving and start living again. You gave me a family when I thought I'd never have one. You gave me purpose and love and a place to belong." "We're quite the pair, aren't we?" Bennett traced her face with gentle fingers. "2 lost souls who found each other." "The best kind of pair," Clara agreed, leaning down to kiss him softly. As the years advanced into the new century, the Pike family became an established fixture in Camp Verde and the surrounding area. Their ranch was known for quality cattle and expertly trained horses. Clara's herb remedies were sought after throughout the territory. Their children were well regarded, known for being hardworking and respectful. Bennett and Clara aged together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. The passion that had initially drawn them together evolved into something richer and more complex. Partnership, friendship, shared history, mutual respect. They knew each other's rhythms and moods, could communicate with a glance across a crowded room, could finish each other's sentences. "Do you remember," Clara said one evening in 1900 as they celebrated their 15th anniversary, "when you told me you'd teach me about the land so I wouldn't get lost again?" "Of course I remember. You were so determined to learn everything immediately. And you were so patient, even when I got frustrated." Clara smiled at the memory. "I think that's when I first started falling in love with you. Not during the rescue, not even during those first lessons, but that day you took me to the ridge and showed me how to read the landscape. You made me feel capable instead of stupid for not knowing." Bennett reached across the table to take her hand. "You were never stupid. You just needed someone to show you. That's all any of us need, really. Someone to show us the way when we're lost." "You showed me more than just directions," Clara said softly. "You showed me how to live again, how to be happy, how to love without fear. And you showed me that being alone wasn't the same as being strong. That letting someone in, trusting them with your heart, that takes more courage than I ever had before you." They raised their glasses in a toast, to 15 years of marriage, to the life they'd built, to the love that had sustained them through drought and plenty, through hardship and joy. Their children were growing up strong and capable. Their ranch was thriving. They had grandchildren to look forward to someday, years of partnership still ahead, but more than any of that, they had each other. The city girl who'd gotten lost in a freak snowstorm, and the lonely cowboy who'd found her. Two people who'd been broken by loss and made whole by love. Two souls who'd recognized each other in the midst of a blizzard and chosen to build a life together. The snow had made her lost, but the cowboy made her found. And in finding each other, they discovered something more precious than either had thought possible. A love that would last through all the seasons of their lives, constant as the Arizona stars overhead, enduring as the land beneath their feet, eternal as the promises they'd made beneath that flower-covered arbor all those years ago. Bennett stood and pulled Clara to her feet, gathering her into his arms for a slow dance despite the lack of music. She followed his lead as naturally as breathing, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Through the window, they could see stars beginning to emerge in the twilight sky. From their children's rooms came the sounds of quiet conversation and laughter. "This," Bennett murmured, his lips against Clara's hair. "This is everything." "Yes," Clara agreed, her arms tightening around him. "This is everything." And it was. The ranch that had been built by hard work and determination. The family that had been created by love and commitment. The partnership that had been forged by two people who'd both needed saving and found salvation in each other. It was everything they'd needed, everything they'd wanted, everything they'd dreamed of during those early days when they were just beginning to understand what they could mean to each other. The years would continue to pass. There would be more challenges, more joys, more everyday moments that made up a life. Rose would eventually marry a neighboring rancher's son and give Bennett and Clara their first grandchildren. Thomas would take over much of the ranch operation as Bennett slowed down with age, proving himself a capable manager. Grace would become a teacher, bringing education to children in the smaller settlements around Camp Verde. But through all of it, through every change and challenge, Bennett and Clara would remain each other's constant. The love that had begun in a snowstorm would endure through decades, growing stronger rather than weaker with time. They would sit together on their porch in their golden years, hands still reaching for each other, eyes still lighting up when they looked at one another, still finding new ways to say "I love you" after 50 years of marriage. Because some loves are ordinary, comfortable, but unremarkable. And some loves are extraordinary, forged in crisis, and sustained by choice and commitment. The love between Clara Norwood and Bennett Pike was the latter kind, the type that people tell stories about, the type that inspires and encourages others to believe in the possibility of finding their person against all odds. It started with snow and a cowboy and a woman who needed saving. It continued with patience and teaching and the gradual building of trust. It flourished with vows spoken and children raised and a life built together from nothing. And it endured through everything because both of them chose it every single day. That was the real story. Not the dramatic rescue, not the romantic courtship, but the daily decision to love and honor and cherish. The choice to be partners in all things, to face life together rather than alone, to build something lasting and true. That was what transformed the rescue from a single moment into a lifetime of moments. That was what made the lost become found and stay found forever. And on warm Arizona nights, when the stars shone bright overhead and the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, if you listened carefully, you might hear laughter from the Pike Ranch. The sound of a family at peace, of love that had stood the test of time, of two people who'd found each other in a blizzard and never let go. The sound of home and happiness, and happily ever after earned through years of choosing each other above all else. The snow had made her lost. The cowboy made her found, and together they made a love story for the ages.